Well, welcome, Dan. Thank you so much for joining us on our podcast. I've really been looking forward to this episode with you and talking about all your wisdom in leadership. How are you doing out there?
In the Pacific Northwest. Summer is coming, doing great. And I love this topic. Can't wait for our conversation.
Great, great. Well, let me introduce you to our audience. So the topic of this podcast is leadership that matters in B2B. So the six dimensions of exceptional leadership. And Dan Albaum is our guest, and he knows quite a bit about this topic. And been looking forward to getting your pearls of wisdom on this. You're quite well known in the industry. So uh, just as a background for our audience, Dan Albaum is a servant leader, marketing strategist, and host of the award-winning Market Impact Insights podcast. Dan's built a career around elevating B2B teams, brands, and leadership principles that drive real impact. So we are really excited that you've joined us. So give our listeners, who may not know you well, can you share a little bit about your journey and what brought you to care so deeply about this leadership process and the impact on B2B?
Sure. Yeah. So my background has been as a marketing leader, primarily focused on B2B. I've worked in a number of different technology spaces. I worked in the wireless industry for several years for leading brands, including Verizon. Worked for Cisco in the unified communication space. Have led global teams in other markets, including the fitness space and in education. And the passion for me, even going through that journey around why leadership matters, really is a deeply personal one. And as I share in my book, The Impact Makers, kind of going back to the beginning of my career, which was in consumer packaged goods for some of the leading food brands, unfortunately, I didn't benefit from having servant leader oriented leadership, leadership that was more empowering versus controlling, that was all about growth and development. Unfortunately, I had some bad experiences, some that really challenged my own confidence and optimism in thinking about what kind of career I could really make for myself. And it actually, while painful in the moment, Dana, it actually became kind of a seminal point where I made a personal choice and I made a promise to myself that I was going to be a different kind of leader, that there was a better way, and I was going to devote myself through my journey that I could lift and empower other people to accomplish great things and really view that as a successful track. So happy ending, but it was very much of a painful experience that really motivated me to want to take that path.
I love it, and you're absolutely uh, you speak to my journey as well, and building a company, having been through lots of different leadership styles, and then getting somewhere where you can make the culture what you really believe in is a tremendous blessing. So you talk about servant leadership, which I love, but talk about that in the context of B2B. Give us a little bit of background on and maybe definition of servant leadership in case some of our listeners are kind of not familiar with all the things that implies. And tell us why that's critical today.
Yeah, it's really interesting. The concept of servant leadership actually isn't new. It's been around for more than 50 years. And so the concept's been out there, variety of different interpretations of that. The one that I kind of gravitate around is really around this concept of a leader who puts the needs of others first. So they set their personal ego aside. They're thinking about others. They're thinking about their team, and more specifically, the well-being of their team and the communities that they serve. And that has a lot of connotation in terms of the communities inside of an organization, across organizations in the world, the kind of social impact, that can happen. And so it's a perspective that, again, sets that personal ego aside and just goes to others first. And so it's a service mindset. And there are many reasons why this is really important today and the benefits of that. There's been lots of research showing that servant-led organizations outperform non-servant-led organizations on metrics, including pre-tax returns. So even the financial aspect of that, certainly when it comes to employee engagement, which we know is a huge influence on ultimately the customer experience that you're delivering, that there are advantages in servant-led organizations. Attracting talent, there's somewhere between 30 to 40%. I've seen estimates that in our workforce today, millennial, Gen Z, what are those new workers that are younger in their careers looking for? They're looking for pathways for growth and development. They're looking for managers and leaders that are engaged, all the attributes that servant leadership brings. So if you want to attract the best, today's marketplace, there are benefits of taking a servant leader approach. That's certainly true in the highly competitive B2B space where you're really, talent is a huge part of your competitive advantage.
Yeah, I think that's so critical. And you're right. I mean, when we're looking at the culture of organizations, it's becoming even more critical with the evolution of the dynamics of the millennials and the Gen Zs. And, we both of us, we've been around for a while. And, I used to say that, uh, trying to get a culture where folks motivate themselves is is kind of this aspirational area, but I think servant leadership really does that. When you are putting people in the right places and you are putting them in an environment where they know why they're there, they know their impact, they matter, right? The
Right. Right.
That's that. This is not kind of back in the day when it was salary and benefits. That doesn't cut it anymore. And I think I've seen. In fact, we had an episode a couple of episodes ago, and it was all around previous companies that we'd been in where we had not, I will not get into the details, but not servant leadership, as you're talking about, an experience you had, and there was so much talent in that organization, and they're all out of that organization, and they left and they built organizations of their own. And so this is super critical topic. And I love you have kind of broken this down into 6 dimensions that you talk about that characterize exceptional leadership. Walk us through those dimensions and let's kind of explore each one.
Sure. Yeah. So this is laid out in the book, and think of this really as that foundation of delivering exceptional leadership. And the first dimension is about developing and nurturing a culture of innovation. That is a culture that actually encourages and fosters people to kind of step outside of the comfort zone and to be always thinking about how can we do things better? How can we introduce new ideas, that there's a positive energy and a pulse associated with creativity. And so that first dimension as a leader is how you actively support building that kind of a culture of innovation. Second dimension, something really near and dear to my heart, which is around building and maintaining authentic and trusted relationships. And we think about kind of the radius of our relationships. It really is a series of different expansive rings that go from ourselves. So first would be our immediate team. Outside of that ring would be other functions and departments within our organization. And then when we think about organization to organization, strategic partnerships, and this is where we talk about actually the analogy of ecosystems in nature, like the tide pools we see in coastal regions where there are all these interconnected organisms that there's kind of this really interesting balance in terms of how all of those organisms coexist. And so this idea of ecosystems in nature, ecosystems in terms of our relationships, really, really critical and important. And of course, foundational to being able to develop those different relationships is having a foundation of trust. And so how do we achieve that? And how do we establish that? And well, we could talk about that for a long,
Yeah,
long time, Dana.
yeah. I mean, trust is so. I think that's one of the foundational principles. When companies express their core values, there's they, what you're talking about is not just the words that somebody is going to put on a piece of paper as their core values, but it is what people experience
Right.
in their leader through their actions, right? So, you probably see my dad back here.
Yeah.
He's a nuclear submarine captain. So, yeah, integrity and trust was core to our development. And it even permeates, as I've built organizations, is that trust and the speed of trust,
Yes.
right? I mean, when you trust, there's especially when you're in a very high growth organization, there is no room, no time for you know, second guessing or verifying, or everybody just has to make sure they don't drop their ball.
Yeah, exactly. And what I found is one of the biggest things that can accelerate getting to that trust level is when you, as a leader, demonstrate vulnerability, okay, in front of your team. And one way of that is simply to be very transparent and own up to the fact that you're not always the smartest person in the room. And yeah, you're human and you've made mistakes. And by the way, here are some of the mistakes I've made and what I've taken as personal learning. And so setting that example, you can literally, when you're just sharing that, let's say it's in a team setting, Dana, you can almost feel like the virtual backpacks that everyone's carrying. You've just removed 50 pounds out of those backpacks. Everyone's kind of breathing in and they're saying, you know what, this is really great because it's okay. I can be vulnerable too. And my leader has already kind of set the tone for that. When you do that, some leaders are very hesitant to do that because they think that somehow they lose the respect of their teams when they show they're able to fail. And
Hmm.
actually, nothing could be farther from the truth. The reverse is true. You're actually incrementally gaining more respect and motivation and support from your team when you show vulnerability.
100%. And that gets back to your authenticity point, right?
Yeah.
Because we're all human beings. And, I remember having conversations with some of my, you know, leadership and, even, other functions in the organization. But, when there's something going on and you can feel it, right? I don't know what the energy is called, but there's something wrong. It's like, forget about the business, forget about, what's screwed up, forget about that stuff. How are you? What's going on? Help me understand. And I think that that is where you create that trust, because you already know that the person has all the skills that they need, right? It's not that. There's something else. And so understanding what's happening in that person's life, or do they need to have a shift in their response, whatever it is. But when you do that, you have engaged that person,
Yes.
and you have strengthened that bond of trust, because business is hard, and you're going to go through hard times together, right? And what is it? We're going to go to war together, right? It's that bonding, and it matters so much.
Yeah, it really does. And when it's genuine interest, when you show that interest in your team member, they can feel it. They're living it in the moment. And by the way, when you're just superficially mailing it in, I think some leaders like mistakenly believe they can bluff their way through that. And we know our team members have a BS meter that is
Hmm.
incredibly sensitive and can really spot that more than you might ever even know. And so
Yeah.
bringing the genuine interest, the eye contact, the questions, the listening, um, that just goes miles in terms of building that trust level. And it just
Yep.
gets stronger and stronger over time. So that's relationships. Number three is around embracing diversity. And when I talk about diversity, it's not just in a traditional, more narrow sense of gender or racial diversity. It's really thinking about the benefits of diverse teams from some other key dimensions. And that includes multi-generational teams. People are at different points of their career, and increasingly we're seeing teams that are comprised of not one, two, maybe sometimes even three, different work generations working side by side. And there's a real diverse mix of perspectives. There's value in having that kind of diversity within a team. Another example of diversity would be different industry and market backgrounds. People are coming in, and while in some sense, in a technical sense, there can be benefits of having previous experience when you recruit members in within your very narrowly defined space, there can be incredible benefits of being open to people that bring the functional expertise, may not have your specific market space in their resume, but that's learnable, that's discoverable in terms of the onboarding, but they're going to bring a fresh outside perspective that's going to challenge maybe some of those long held notions you have. And that's good. That's healthy, constantly be challenging yourself. So it's not so much that the differences that we have in themselves that tends to divide us. This is a great quote from Audre Lorde that I just love. And I have, talked with leadership teams about. It's not the differences themselves. It's just our mindset around our willingness to embrace having a diversity of perspectives and what that means in terms of challenging conversations, debate in a constructive, not a destructive way. All of that's goodness. So that's the diversity dimension we
Mhm.
talk about.
Yeah, and I love that. And when you have all these different perspectives, it's coupled with those other elements you have. They have to be safe to share their divergent opinions, right?
Right.
And I was always the person who like said what they weren't supposed to say when it came to, executive strategy. But it's like if you don't want me to give you my opinion, I'm not as valuable to you as I could be,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so, having a culture where it's like, stop the line, something's wrong, and allowing and encouraging that type of diverse opinion. And it's active, right? You have to actively develop that so people feel like they're in a space where that is embraced, right?
Yeah. The other aspect of diversity within a team is that each person, how they process their thoughts, how they intake information, how they formulate point of view, how they express that, what's their comfort zone and kind of their basis of really having the greatest confidence to do that. It's going to be different. There's just not one formula. So one of the things I found as a leader, it's really valuable is by recognizing that is to be very intentional about being more inclusive in terms of ensuring that the voices, some folks are going to immediately in a team meeting, they're going to start throwing out, their opinions, have very loud voice. That's great, gets an energy flow. What about those deeper thinkers, maybe a little more introverted on the team, but have a lot to say when they do say that? How do you encourage that? Bring them into the conversation if help is needed to kind of ensure that you bring that in, but be conscious of that. Don't just gravitate to those natural personalities that may be more extroverted, and so really take a more holistic, diverse view of getting all those voices represented, in your conversations.
I love that.
Yeah, yeah.
All
So
right, tell us more.
the number four is around data. We've never been at any point in history at a time where we have access and fast access to more and more volumes of data. Well, how do we leverage data to make more informed decisions? And so the focus here as a leader is not just through the action of collecting reams and reams of data, it's to make meaningful and better decisions. So a lot of that comes down to very strong focus and clarity. What are the questions that the business and you're trying to ask and get answers to? And I found that in a lot of cases where that's ambiguous and maybe not clear, or maybe it's not aligned across the organization, you have a lot of wasted effort, a lot of activity, busy work, and you're collecting it. And then yet you're just weighted down by all this volume of data. And then do we ever get to a decision, or are we stuck in this kind of paralysis of the analysis, right? And so this is where exceptional leadership is, how do you navigate through, become more productive and efficient in terms of leveraging data for those decisions?
Yeah, and you are talking to the heart of ayeQ, which came from my experience as a leader. I'm an engineer. I get very by a very strange path, find myself as a chief marketing officer in a B2B software company. And I'm like, how does anybody know what the heck they're doing or why they're doing what they're doing? And the reason I bring that up is because we talked earlier about people being engaged and understanding their part of success,
Mhm.
why they're integral to the success. And in marketing, what I would find is, there's a million good, great things you can do in marketing, but if you don't have a central plan that everybody knows and is aligned to, you're going in all these different directions, right? So it's what, but it has to be lean because it has to be consumable, right? So what are we doing? What's the plan? And what are the essential elements of that plan that everybody must know? And then how do you align that plan with what everybody understands is their job and their objectives and their goals? And if there's a place where they can go, oh, I know exactly why I'm doing what I'm doing, right? And it's that we have structure and we have data today to be able to align that and to use all of this wealth of information and pare it down to the essential, right? Don't tell me what's happening. Tell me what I need to do next, right? Give me that directional guidance. And that's the hard part, right? Serving up tons and tons of data is where I feel like people are drowning today, but it's the intentionality and finding the things that matter in the data. So you're I could talk about that for a couple of
Uh-huh.
hours, but I won't. But I love that that's one of the elements that you find is essential to creating this culture because that is all of my experience and really one of the big inspirations behind our platform.
Yeah, I mean it's a huge part of this idea of clarity of purpose. And when you're
Mhm.
able to establish that and people can internalize that, it's powerful, right? Because it's that motor, you mentioned earlier the inevitable ups and downs. I mean, it is a bit of a roller coaster. We got to fasten ourselves in. That's kind of what the business world is like. It's not going to be just smooth sailing or smooth trajectory. Well, how do you get through those rough patches? It's like when you've got clarity of purpose, the data and the learning that you get from that and applying that learning can really fuel that clarity of purpose. So yeah, it's intrinsic in that. So that's dimension 4. When we
Okay.
get to dimension 5, this is around exceptional leadership behaviors. And this is really the idea of what are you bringing every day? Those intentional choices in terms of how you lead, and then more specifically, the behaviors, not just the words that you're bringing. And so this is things such as a servant leader mindset, things like emotional intelligence. You mentioned ayeQ earlier, along the lines of that. And one of the things I talk about in the book is a framework that has really paid off for me. I've seen this really, enable teams to increase their performance and how I can support them as a leader. And this is the idea of the triad. And so this is really built on 3 principles. The first is around empowerment. So we're not talking about what I call helicopter leadership, where you're hovering, the micromanagement, lots of different words for that. This is really where there's agreed upon outcomes, and then you get out of the way and really remove barriers where you can, but let those team members soar and really drive that. That's empowerment. Second part of this is transparency. Transparency in terms of what are those expectations, what are those measurable outcomes, that we're looking for. Transparency in terms of feedback, transparency in terms of critical information, the good news and the bad news. So transparency. And then the third piece, which is really critical because this is where there's a lot of misperception around servant leadership, which is accountability, which is that those that have the responsibility, there's a clarity of accountability. And, Dana, I've had, many conversations about servant leadership, and sometimes I get some pushback where people say, well, servant leadership sounds like it's, quote, soft leadership, doesn't feel like that really is holding people accountable. And actually, it's the opposite,
Mhm.
because when you're helicopter leading, when you're micromanaging, you're giving your team the excuse to put their hands up and say, you know what? Dana's going to come in anyway, and she's going to basically tell me kind of how to do things, or she's going to do it herself. So I'll just kind of sit back and I'll let Dana come in because I know what's going to happen. Opposite of that, servant leadership, where we've agreed on, hey, what is this goal? I'm getting out of your way. I'm here to help. I'm going to remove barriers. But guess what? Dana has that responsibility. Okay, what kind of progress are you making, on your game plan? Uh, how are you measuring that? What kind of course change corrections are you making along the way? And you're driving more accountability with servant leadership. So it's an interesting dichotomy, right, in terms of that misperception.
It is, and I've seen that happen in quite a few organizations where the leadership was kind of, the drive-by shooting, right? Where it's like,
Yeah, yeah,
stop what you're doing because we're doing flavor of the month, right? And you see the energy of that culture just implode. And it's like you said, it's like, you see a new person join the team and they've got all these great ideas, and they show up wanting to innovate,
yeah,
right? And they have all these great ideas, and they want to, make an impact. And then they end up at this place where, just tell me what you want me to do. Just tell me what you want me to do. Because I've done so many things that have gotten shot down, or I've done so many things where I have to go back and redo it and redo it and redo it and redo it. Just tell me what you want me to do. That is not a culture of innovation, but I've seen it happen over and over. It's really sad because these types of individuals have so much to offer, so much talent. And ultimately they leave.
yeah. I mean, it's literally the analogy. You bring in the sports analogy. I'm a big football fan. It's literally taking a major um, air pump and literally sucking the air out of a
Mhm.
football. I mean, and literally you can see
Yep.
that. And I tell a story in the book. One of the leaders that I work with, this is back to the smartest person in the room syndrome, where, you're taking the approach of every interaction, I'm going to reinforce to my team that I have advanced intelligence. And it's really more, you're here to serve me as an audience, and I'm going to basically talk, you listen, you take notes, and then move on. And we'd have these whiteboard meetings, and this leader would take the pen and basically stand in front of this group time and time again, basically kind of rattling off. Maybe it's a series of observations and disappointments in terms of where this team has fallen short, and this is what we're going to do to correct that. And you could just scan the room and just look at the body language. It was like the air was sucked out of the room. You had people slumped back, not making even any eye contact, not paying attention, the eye rolls, just that feeling of helplessness, actually, or hopelessness as well. And is there anything worse than that wasted opportunity of intelligence and capability when that air, that life just gets sucked out of your organization?
Yeah, it's I know both of us have been around long enough to see multiple scenarios like that. But unfortunately, I think it's the leader in the situation feels like they're doing what is supposed to be their job,
Yeah,
right? They're supposed to give everybody direction, but it's how you give the direction. But
yeah,
it's also, like you said, the accountability, because if you give your team the ability to go innovate, they're going to make mistakes, or they're going to hit walls, or they're going to go about something the wrong way. And when they come back and you are able to problem solve with them,
yes,
that's the trust, right?
yeah,
Because they've come to you for help, and you have to be able to give them help, right? That's kind of this piece of, yeah, it's the accountability, but that's where they know they can depend on you when they have the problem that needs to be solved. Not give me the answer ahead of time. I don't know what you think about that.
absolutely.
That's
Well, I mean, it's the idea of just we're in this together, right? I mean, it's that
Mhm.
that sense of connectedness and that sense of authentically being having their back and being
Mhm.
there for that. I mean, that's like elevation gain. That's your aircraft carrier that's just, plane is just zooming, taking off, and you're providing that propulsion, when you're able to really demonstrate that authentically. So that's behaviors, leadership behaviors. And then we get to dimension 6, which is really interesting because this one is less about a behavior, and this is really about mindset, and that is the power of optimism. And why is that critical, for a leader to bring an optimistic mindset? And this is another one where there's kind of an interesting debate when people talk about optimism, because I've had some people say, "Well, Dan, I'm not sure I like that because isn't that kind of this naive view that everything's always going to be all right, turn out okay?" And actually, no, it's not. And there's a great quote from Melinda Gates, and she said this so well, which is optimism isn't a belief that things are going to automatically get better. It's a conviction that we can make things better. And so it kind of shifts the onus back on accountability, which is what kind of capability and power do we have in ourselves? It's an intentional choice. And so this isn't a naive belief that there aren't going to be headwinds, challenges, unexpected bad things happen. Yes. And it isn't ignoring the bad things or the challenges. It's never losing focus on what our capabilities as human beings, as leaders, as teams that we can accomplish. And so maintaining that conviction is everything when it comes to team performance through
Mhm.
those inevitable challenges, headwinds, unexpected roadblocks.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's, there is that dichotomy when you're in that senior leadership position, and there are going to be peaks and valleys in your business, no matter what size company you're in. And that uh well, tell me what you think about this. Um, even when you have a fear or doubt about what's happening, that is not is something that you have to get through personally,
Mhm.
because you have to convey the conviction to the team. It's the fear piece. You talked about, you don't have to know all the answers, but I think having optimism is not being afraid. Like, it's not being afraid if you don't have the answer, right? It's okay if you don't have the
Right.
answer
Right.
because you're going to figure it out. What
Yeah.
do you think?
Yeah, no, I think it's huge. And, Mark Pattison, who's been a guest on my podcast, and Mark was a professional football player. And then at age 50, kind of got to this point of saying, what do I do next with my life? He kind of hit a crossroads, and he set a goal that he wanted to be the first professional football player to climb the seven summits. That's the highest peaks in all seven continents. And over more than a decade, Mark set about that goal, had some challenges, a couple of second attempt requirements on some of these peaks, including Mount Everest. And he accomplished this goal. But one of the things he said is, it's not the fear itself, it's not acknowledging the fear. And so he had this phrase, face
Hmm.
the fear. And so that's how he got through some of the challenges of really exposing yourself, up to and at 29,000 feet, which is one step at a time, 1 foot forward. Can I get that next step forward? Oxygen depleted, high altitude, danger zone. But face your fear, acknowledge the fear. It's okay. That's a natural emotion. But then, draw from your supports. What do you have in terms of the ability to navigate through to still get the outcome you want? And by the way, that often means, that relationship ecosystem that you have. It's built from the strength of others, the people that are there behind you that can come in and bring wisdom and best practices and help you kind of maybe get to a solution that might not immediately be apparent to help you feel better and in terms of offsetting that fear. So face the fear.
Yeah, and as we're talking to B2B executive leadership, where do you see those supports coming from? Because I think that there are some that are not necessarily turning to your leadership team for that support. That's
Right.
not the right support in certain circumstances. What are other areas of support that you think that B2B senior leadership should try to cultivate?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things, that can really be helpful there beyond just hopefully, building some good peer-to-peer relationships within if we're talking on an executive leadership team level. But I found sometimes some of the most meaningful conversations that benefit me as well as the other person are when I actually have real conversations and I ask for input from team, maybe even someone one, two, or three levels down. I mean, I think be very open to get the perspective of someone who's maybe looking at things from a different vantage point than just your own. I'll call it the rarefied air of, executive senior leadership. Sometimes people that are out closest to the customer, for example, going out and being able to, you may be in an executive leadership position, go out and have a real authentic conversation and get feedback from one of your sales reps that's actually out talking to customers and prospects every day. What are they hearing? What are they feeling? How has it changed in the last 6 months? And when you engage, and I found them to be like very, very open and wanting to be able to share that because they feel they now have a voice, of connecting customer need back into the organization, you're going to get a whole new perspective. And it's going to challenge that insular, if you just contain yourself to a very specific small group. The other thing that I would just say is seek out other perspectives and voices that maybe aren't in your immediate network. How can you do that? I found going to one of the biggest benefits of going to events. Of course, we want to sell things, if we're there and we're exhibiting, events can be great, virtual or in person, but they're also huge learning experiences for you to meet other people that are within that same
Mhm.
universe, but maybe outside of your immediate network. So I always, when I go to an event, I'll always challenge myself to say, I want to come away from that event with at least 5 quality new interactions with people that I didn't know before I went to that event, if it's a live event. And so the virtual events, though, sometimes it's a way to connect with people on LinkedIn. If you see who's attending and you get access to that list, reach out proactively and engage in a connection request. I've had some amazing relationships blossom from just an initial connection request. And it's not transactional. It's not about trying to
Mhm.
sell a service to someone. It could just be, hey, I want someone that maybe I can engage with. Maybe we can set up a virtual coffee chat and we can compare notes. I've had some amazing
Mhm.
conversations that way. So this is a time to be proactive and intentional in terms of going out and seeking that. Podcasts, books, of course. There's so much richness out there in terms of what's
Hey,
available
give
through
us your
alternatives.
favorite. Give us. I'm going to do your the book that every B2B leader needs to read.
All right. So one of my favorites, and she was a guest on my podcast, Tiffany Bova. Tiffany was a analyst at Gartner for many years, and she's been a thought leader, evangelist at Salesforce, and she is all about customer experience. And she wrote a book, The Experience Mindset, which really states the case as to why investing in higher quality employee experience has a huge
Hmm.
positive impact on the customer experience that you can deliver. And so, as much as, and it's critical, yes, be externally focused, be customer focused. Of course, we want to do that as an organization, but don't do that at the total expense of not investing and understanding what your internal employee experience is all about. The two have to kind of go hand in hand. You need to be stepping up and investing in making both of those better, and they're intrinsically linked. And she really just lays the case out in a very compelling way. Urge B2B leaders to read that book.
I love that. I love that. So I always like to, and I know that I'm looking down, going, "Wow, we've been chatting for a while." I love to kind of do some wrap up in the podcast, to give some key takeaways for our listeners. And we've explored a lot of things. What do you have for, maybe some of the leadership in various functions? What are some takeaways that are actionable takeaways that you would leave our listeners with?
Yeah, I think a couple of things, which is be very intentional. It starts with kind of personal decisions. Be intentional about the kind of leader that you want to be. First of all, have a point of view, and truly understand, in terms of what kind of leader you want to be. I work with a lot of leadership teams as a part of leadership team development. And you'll be amazed when I'm kicking off this engagement of their reading of the book and we're going through the Your Path to Impact experience. I'll ask the question, which is, what is your leadership philosophy? Because I want to get some roundtable discussion. And I will say that that is an awkward question for many because they
Mm,
haven't really. And then I ask the follow up when I'm not getting that kind of immediate response, is saying, is this something other than a job interview, maybe in the last year or 2 years, but is this something that you really are ever actively talking about with your peers or here as a whole leadership team? And generally the response is no, they're not talking about it. It means they're probably not actively thinking about it. So the first thing is actively think about it, be intentional, and then hopefully I've laid a good case here, or if you check out the podcast in the book, that servant leadership, making that choice is the right choice in terms of empowering versus command control. And then the other piece of advice I would say on your journey, active listening. So as much as you need to be an effective, clear communicator, the big part of this equation ultimately that's going to impact success or failure is going to be your ability to engage, connect, and actively listen. Be there in the moment in every interaction, focused, not distracted, playing back what you hear, ensure understanding and alignment, and then showing through your actions, applying the influence of that learning and that connection into the things that you're committing and supporting. As a leader, you do that, and you're going to see your teams develop, soar, and they'll take the mountain with you. To use the military analogy, you run up the hill, you look back, they're going to be right there with you. It's not going to be an empty hill.
I love it. I love it. Well, tell us a little bit more about your book so that people can get some more detail on what you've been chatting about.
Yeah, the impact makers, which is actually talking about those 6 dimensions that we covered real briefly here of exceptional leadership. And it features the voices of more than 80 exceptional leaders that I've had those podcast conversations with, along with some of my own perspectives in terms of my leadership experience. You can find the book wherever you find books, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, any of those places in all formats. Check out the book. And then the podcast as well, which is Market Impact Insights, Apple, Spotify, or go to marketimpactnow.com/podcast, and you can get access to all 220 episodes as of today,
Wow.
Dana.
Wow, yeah, you're schooling me. You're schooling me. No, that's fantastic. And I knew that this would be a really wonderful conversation. I love what you've developed and how you're making this real, and looking at the success of business metrics when this approach is taken, right? So for the metrics oriented folks, it's going to pay off. Servant leadership pays off. Um, so I love that. Well, Dan, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. Really enjoyed having you, and I hope we can have you back in not too long on another topic.
Thanks, Dana. I really enjoyed the conversation.
All right, we'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.